Welcome to Faith, Hope, and Love during an election. I'm so pleased today to have Carol Bremer Bennett, who is the U.S. Director of World Renew, which is an organization that does community development and disaster response and many other things. And so welcome, Carol. I'm so glad that you were able to talk today.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to start by asking you a little bit about the challenges or new challenges that World Renew has during this time of the pandemic. I'm sure, you're used to dealing with crisis and dealing with hunger and dealing with helping people most in need. Now we have a new hunger crisis and we have new things going on around the world. How are you scaling up, or how is your organization managing in this really difficult time?
Yeah, thank you for that. So it has been a challenging time. We are so connected into the communities where we work that we had to make some difficult choices early on, whether we could keep going to the communities or not. Would we possibly be bringing harm and the coronavirus into those communities? And as governments and countries around the world progressively started locking down, we found that we had to find ways, even in the developing countries where we work, not just in our main offices in the US and Canada, but all over, we had to figure out ways to work remotely. And so, we really have learned that people are quite adaptive, and we have a lot of innovative leaders within the communities where we work around the world. And so we were able to do an early push of basic cell phones and tablets out to some of the community leaders. And where there is some connecting point, we actually were able to start to figure out how to communicate through those devices and to keep communities informed and working towards their goals, even if we couldn't visit regularly or be present regularly. And the really great thing about World Renew's work is we work through the local church in a country. And so because they really are the ones who designed the plan for their community and set the goals for their community, in a lot of ways, we always work to be as much in the background as possible. And suddenly when we can't even go, the community steps forward. And so it's so encouraging to see communities rise to this hardship and this occasion, just like we've seen communities in the US be able to do. Communities all over the world are doing this. They're finding ways to work together and to get out information and be innovative. And so since the church doesn't move, it's still in the communities, we're finding that the work can still be done. Mm-hmm. We were able to do a number of things to help with prevention at the early months of COVID. And we're able to actually get out about 1.2 million participants participating in some of the preventions for COVID, whether that's in, how to wear a mask or hand washing, making sure there is clean water and soap and things available where it wasn't before. Just really trying to teach communities prevention. And as the virus has progressed and the time has become long, there are some African countries that are doing really well, perhaps because of their exposure to Ebola and other crises before. They actually have really good contact tracing and even can do house-to-house testing when you need it. And so there are things that they've learned through the various crises they've been in that maybe we can, as Westerners, learn from. So we take that humility with us to think that we might have to learn that as well. And then we see that the communities, there's always this, we work a lot with what's called truth-centered transformation, because when something happens, lies start to, spread, rumors start to spread through the community about what this might be about. And so we've done quite a bit of work making sure that we're talking and pulling groups together so they truly understand what the virus is and what it is not. And some people will try to use something that's scary and unknown to use it to their own advantage or to create power, for themselves. And we have been doing quite a bit of work in what's called the shadow pandemic, because COVID, of course, is a global pandemic on its own, but underneath COVID, it's casting a shadow over women and girls and their safety. And so we're seeing that girls who no longer can go to school in Kenya because of the lockdowns are really at risk for making choices for themselves that deter from the goals they had educationally. People are returning from the cities where jobs have been shut down and lost back into the countrysides, and some of these people have been preying on girls. A lot of young girls and women are reporting incredible increases of sexual violence and abuse and exploitation. And then in some of the hardest hit countries where we work, the hunger is so great. And I think this is something that isn't being talked about enough, but the hunger pains are so great that families are making those difficult choices after they've eaten the last of their reserves that was supposed to last them through the whole, what they might call the hungry season, the dry season when you're not harvesting, or they've sold their last female goat or eaten their last female goat, which means they don't have an eye on the future anymore. And when they get into those situations, young girls can be a way to save the family. And then you see the sexual trafficking happen. As hard as those choices are, families are trying to survive, and it's a terrible situation to be put in. And so we're trying to continue to make sure that we're responding to the places where we're seeing these high incidences of hunger, and making sure that we're present and that there's options and choices so that families and communities don't get to that point. So those are some of the things that we're working in, and it's going to be a lot. There was actually a Gates study released a few weeks ago that talked about how we may be losing 25 years of poverty alleviation work through this 1 year of the pandemic. So that's heavy on our hearts. We rejoice in knowing that communities can rise and communities are resilient. And so that's really exciting to see. But we know there's a big work ahead of us too.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it sounds too from, the fact that you were able to provide people with cell phones and tablets and connect in that way. I wonder, and I'm sure you're already thinking about this, how this time will change the way you do your work, in a few years' time. It sounds like one positive thing could be the empowerment of, even more than they already have been, the empowerment of your local leaders and their ability to use technology in new ways and to be, provided with that technology. Do you see other ways that this might change the way that World Renew does its work in the future?
Yeah, much like we've experienced in North America, where suddenly maybe it's too much, but we can attend every meeting, right? And so we have to make good choices about the meetings we want to attend. But we've also been able to be at tables and in conversations that we've never been at before, because it's kind of equalized the playing field a bit and the access to the playing field. And so it's really quite something that we can have communities not only connecting with our staff more often, because it doesn't depend on staff getting and driving out to remote communities, but also that the communities themselves can start to connect to one another. And that interconnectedness is really quite significant. On top of that, yeah, we can really start to dream about ways that we can do this so that we reduce costs, reduce our carbon footprint with travel. I love to travel, and we still know that at the heart, we need to see each other, face to face at times and physically, but there are other ways that we can pass learnings to one another and grow from one another. And suddenly, we did a project evaluation recently for the country of Mozambique and some of our work there. And the evaluation team usually all, flies to Mozambique and interviews all kinds of people. Well, they were able to still do that and still interview even farmers in the field via these really basic cell phones. And so That's quite something, you know, and it is empowering. It's empowering to people who think that they're maybe disconnected from the bigger, you know, meetings and so forth, to actually have a seat at the table. So we're excited for that.
Yeah, that's exciting. I wanted to ask you too, turning our focus on the United States, you're Navajo, and I wonder how is World Renew doing work with the Navajo Nation, and how I'd love to hear you speak about that and what they're going through as well.
Yeah, yes, we are. You know, when COVID began and I started to hear my friends talk and you know, share on Facebook what it was like near the Navajo Nation, um, I had this incredible pull to be back and to use what I know from World Renew, to, you know, leverage the resources we might have from World Renew to help the Navajo and the Zuni people who are very close to there. I am of the clans, the Bitterwater people and the Water Flows Together people, so the Totochitni and the Tohaglini people. And I just felt so pulled to be there. And yet I was here in Grand Rapids, not on the Navajo land, but on the land of the Odawa and the Pretoria people. And I talked to my staff and I said, you know, I think we need to do something. This community is being hit so hard. There's, you know, up to 40% of Navajos don't have electricity, up to 30% don't have running water in their homes. We know that those elements are really important for being able to stay at home, being able to practice the proper hand washing. When you're hauling your own water, and that water has to, you know, both water your livestock, provide showering water for your family, cooking water for your family, drinking water for your family, you know, everything. Those extra hand washes, I think we all remember how much we were washing our hands, and you started to think, can my skin handle this? You know, it's raw with all this hand washing. And to think that, you know, I had an unlimited supply of water coming out of my faucet, and to think about people in our very own country that didn't have that, it was heart-wrenching for me. Mm-hmm. So I talked to my staff and I said, you know, this may be my Esther moment. Am I in this role for such a time as this? Is this okay if we move in this direction? And they said, you know what, we need to. This is per capita, the incidences of COVID, both, you know, getting and contracting the virus, as well as the mortality rates, are so high, and they continue to be some of the highest in the country. And actually, if you really treat the Navajo Nation as a nation, they're still some of the highest in the world if you compare it against other countries. And so we did start to respond, and we were able to help with supplying water so that people had more water than they were used to, helping to supply especially elderly people with food. Another thing about the Navajo Nation, it's really large. And so, you know, it's like the size of the state of West Virginia. There's, you know, probably about 175 to 200,000 people who live on the Navajo Nation. And that's in the states of New Mexico, Arizona, and Colorado, and Utah, right in the Four Corners area there. And it's a food desert. We talk about food deserts in some of the inner city communities and how hard it is to find a full service grocery store and purchase good, healthy, nutritious food at a good price in our inner cities. But the Navajo Nation only has 13 full service grocery stores in the state of West Virginia. Imagine if they only had 13 grocery stores. All the other places where you can buy food are your gas station convenience store. And we all know both the price you pay and how expensive it is, but also the choices are not nutritional. And so people drive 2 to 3 hours sometimes to go, oftentimes off of the reservation, to the border cities around the nation to shop. And everybody piles in, and everybody goes, and grandma goes, and, you know, there's a lot of the beauty of intergenerational life in living, but it's very dangerous with the virus. And so we started to help supply food so that it could be delivered to especially the elderly. We also looked at ways to partner with some of the students, because even, you know, I know your daughter's doing online learning right now. My son was doing it at the beginning of this school year, and certainly everybody was last spring. And if you don't have electricity, you don't have internet, you know, and so how are you going to do that? And so we were able to partner with the educational institutions to help them think of creative ways to do that with, again, with tablets, laptops, flash drives with lessons on them, so you don't need internet, those kinds of things. So yeah, it's really been humbling. You know, as I talk to my staff or my friends who are working as staff in hospitals there, it is again on the rise. For a long time, they really had severe shortages of PPE, and were making their own masks, were making their own gowns out of Tyvek material, which you use, you know, when you're siding houses, they go to Home Depot and sew this. I mean, it was just really hard. That's the other thing we helped is finding sources for PPE and getting some items donated as they set up field hospitals and high school gyms and so forth. And still, there's such a shortage of ICU beds and ventilators and so forth that it's going to be tough as the winter season comes. The Navajo Nation is at a beautiful climate and high elevation. And so they do, even though it's in the Southwest, it's not the desert Southwest and the heat that you think of, but it does get snow. It's cold. People are going to need firewood and other things. And so it's going to be hard to stay at home.
Is there a way for people listening that they could donate specifically to help the Navajo Nation through World Renew, or what are some of your suggestions for someone to help?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, because we work through churches, we're working through a number of different churches that are responding. And so that's been something that we really feel like then, you know, people will see the church, the local church, as that community hub and that place where they can go for help. And so they'll continue that pattern. And so when we leave after COVID is over, that church remains. And so we've helped that church have its, you know, good and rightful place in the community. So yeah, if you go to worldrenew.net, you will see all the COVID responses that we're doing. And certainly one of them there where you can designate funds to is to the Navajo response to COVID.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it just sounds like such an emergency to do that. So yeah.
It really is.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thanks for informing us about that. Now, the name of this series, of course, is Faith, Hope, and Love During an Election. And that's been a title that, you know, various guests that I've spoken with have laughed and said, you know, is that an oxymoron? Is that, how can we talk about faith, hope, and love during this really divisive and divided and difficult time? But at the same time, I think that, you know, you as a person of faith are probably always seeking out those things, and those things motivate your work. So I would love to hear in what ways you're finding hope or keeping the faith or finding ways that you can either give or receive love in this really, I mean, your work, which has always been, I think, very demanding and challenging and creative and requires so much cross-cultural work and thinking and budgets and all those things. But to have to do that work right now during this pandemic, obviously gives you that much more to think about and to worry about. So how are you finding faith, hope, and love during this time?
Well, I think one thing that we talk about hope a lot in World Renew. And we recognize as we start and want to serve, we are not the creators of hope. We can't create hope. We don't bring or deliver hope. It's not, you know, this transactional commodity that we can deliver to somewhere else and, oh, they're good, there it is, you know. It's more a state of being that we are. We are created, and the Bible even tells us, you know, these three remain: faith, hope, and love. And so they're core and foundational values and kind of essences of who we are. And so I think while you can maybe lose them, I don't know that you can go off and find them without just digging just right into the image of God within you, because you are faith, hope, and love. That's how He's created us. And so that's really at the core of your being. And I think for me, having a global perspective is helpful, because I get to see all different ways that people are rising to this occasion and coming together. And when I don't feel it in my own neighborhood, my own city or state, or even my own country, I get to be reminded. And even recently was on a call with some leaders in our Integral Alliance. When we broke up into small groups to have prayer, they immediately said, "We're praying for you, Carol. We know, the United States, they've been watching our COVID numbers. They've been watching the things that maybe have been distracting us from really being able to respond to the COVID in a systematic and strategic way." And it was quite something to hear, this leader from the UK and this leader from New Zealand say, we've been praying for you and for the United States. And I think that to me, and as Christians, that we cross all those borders. And so that's really been reassuring and bolstering to my faith. I have been finding quite a bit of my faith and my hope and the love in making sure that I keep disciplined in my devotions. And one of the things that we did at World Renew was to engage a spiritual director when we all went remote and people were feeling so unsettled. We engaged a spiritual director who's been leading guided meditations with us twice a week for the duration. And that has been so good to hear the words of the ancient mystics, of the contemporary mystics, whether it be, people like Richard Rohr, or I think his name is Stephen Garnes Holmes. He has an Unfolding Light website, but to hear those prayers and to have those things where you just stop and you just find that great love that God has for you and kind of bask in that love, imagine that. I imagine the New Mexico sun, on me, and just seeing that those rays of light and love are coming from the one who is the beloved, the one who really wants me to be a beloved. And so I find a lot of faith, hope, and love in pausing, getting grounded, and keeping those things, in front of me.
It's beautiful. And another thing that might, carry on after this time could be that organizations like World Renew might employ a spiritual director to create that sort of community. I mean, in addition to the mindfulness and meditation and the prayer that you experience, I'm sure that's creating connections among your staff members as well in a new way. People are likely feeling more vulnerable to each other and connected to each other if you're all doing this together. I think that just sounds so beautiful.
It really is. And one of the things I appreciate during those times is using, natural physical elements during that time. And I think in this world where everything's gone virtual and my whole staff is, always just two-dimensional on my screen, to really touch and hold some of those things. So, even lighting a candle and setting a stage and knowing that they're all lighting a candle too, there's such beautiful symbolism in coming around Christ's light together. Even though we're separated by distance, that's something that can't separate us. We're not separated from the love of Christ, and that light can never be snuffed out. And so, lighting a candle, for me, I've got some sage that I also like to burn and to light and just to fill those senses, because we're physical beings and God created us to experience Him in all of these great ways. And when we're alone and remote, I think it's more important to have those physical things that we use. And so I would encourage people to think about that. Think about, boy, I'm missing physical things. I don't have a lot of people with me, but maybe I can. I've got my, it's actually right here by my desk. I've got my candle that I can light and my sage bundle here. This is getting kind of small, that I can light. And that's important to be able to have those physical elements. God speaks God speaks to us when we open up all of our senses again to him. I know that even though the holidays might be different and we've got an election coming up and, less than 2 weeks now. And I think that I was considering, how do you make sure that you're still coming together? And I think that reminding ourselves of our interconnectedness and of our shared values is so important. And whenever I travel to other cultures and visit another place, the best part after you arrive and the singing has happened and the dancing and you're kind of embarrassed, that there's this big greeting has happened, you sit in a circle with one another. And I know that we're in a virtual world right now, and it's hard to imagine that we're in circles, but I think we need to continue to find ways to have people, everyone, people that we agree with, people that we might not agree with, but people who bear the image of God in our circles at tables together, whether they be actual real tables or virtual tables, and that we really are practicing that ancient hospitality and custom of letting everyone be an equal part of a circle. And I think that as I think about some of the arguments really that happen and the divisive conversations that happen, I wish that people would go back to some of those talking circles and from the indigenous cultures of the world to realize how you do that how you can do that with such great respect and truly listening deeply to one another and always looking for that connecting point to approach it with great humility and curiosity to try to really understand where somebody's coming and to realize that no one has all wrong ideas. There's going to be something in there that can help you grow and really trying to understand and go deeper. And so that's something that I certainly miss from my travels, is not sitting in those circles with lots of different cultures. But I think we have to continue to challenge ourselves to find and create those circles and those kinds of respectful talking circles with our friends, with our families, with our fellow church congregations, and even with strangers. Let us be people who are circle keepers.
Oh, I love that. What a good word. Well, thank you so much for talking with us today and for all that wisdom. And I'll be thinking of you as you are doing this important work and the unique challenges that you have and just having to, I can't imagine how much you're thinking on your feet and having to pivot and do projects differently. And so I wish you all the best as you do this really important work.
Thank you. It takes a great village to be able to pivot. I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
So I'm thankful for the staff and the people around me who are all leaning into that work.
Awesome. Well, I wish everyone there all the best.